Hello, hello. So, welcome to another episode of LARVOL and Friends. This is the podcast that we do every Tuesday. And today we are doing LARVOL and Friends with Mark Gramling, who's actually, um, who's actually one of the internally working people. So, we're keeping it internal again today. And it's good to be back every Tuesday. We do it at 6 a.m. Pacific time. Uh, really nice having you, Mark. So Mark Grabling is actually working as the director of project operations for LARVOL. Uh, Over to you, Mark, if you'd like to give a quick introduction.
Well, hello everyone out in the podcast universe. Nice to be here to chat with my friend, my colleague Shahir. So this is Mark Gramling, director of product, primarily focused in oncology at LARVOL, and been with LARVOL dating back to about 2013. And we wanted to connect today to talk a little bit about, I don't know, I guess my experiences in the healthcare space and what we do at Larval. And I'll let Shahir, as the question asker, to the premise beyond that. But it's a pleasure to be here, Shahir. Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon to everyone out there listening.
Thank you very much, Mark. Thank you for joining us today. And like every week, we're very excited to start on this as well. So, Mark, as we're gonna shed a bit of light on your career in this one, uh, let me go ahead right away with the questions. What was it exactly that actually pulled you towards oncology initially?
That's a great question. I wasn't expecting that one right off the bat. So, what pulled me towards oncology? Um, It was really a progression. I'd say it goes all the way back from my early academics. I studied biochemistry initially in my undergraduate career. Um, Really, I was working in microbiology models of DNA damage. So that lends itself structurally towards cancer when you're talking about DNA damage. But I really hadn't studied directly uh, in oncology. And then when I pursued my PhD, I did a couple of different rotations in different labs and looked a little bit in uh, vascular disease and studied that for a bit, and then also rotated in a lab that was DNA damage based and DNA replication structures in tumors. And I actually settled upon a lab that did a little bit of both. That actually was a bit of a fusion between the vascular space and how that interacts with tumor cells. So I guess what drew me in was I couldn't decide what I was interested in. So I started studying something a little bit at the interface of the two, and then pursued studies further in lymphoma development and the oncogenic process of lymphoma. So I guess you might say I backed my way into an interest in oncology over about 9 years or so.
Nice, super nice. It's great to see you where you are, Mark, in your career right at this point of time. And yeah, so I understand that one thing kind of led to the other, and you've been able to make a journey. So what would you say was the experience carrying that for 13 years? It's probably around 8 years, right? At Larval. What was the experience, and what would you think that things actually are better than it would have been if you were anywhere else that you feel right now?
That's an incredibly philosophical question, Shahir. Where are things better for me now than perhaps where they could have been? Um, I think with Larval and also with other work I've done in the space, um, by sort of moving outside of or a little bit beyond of academia. I made a pretty sharp left turn, going from pure academia into sort of the space that now I've been working with LARVOL for a number of years. It's really exposed me to so much more beyond. I mean, there's so much fascinating technology in life sciences, from your basic techniques at the bench, to also the technology of analyzing genetic mutations, and all of those things are wonderful within the academic space. But it's really a whole different universe, creating products, helping to build products, as we do it here at LARVOL, serving the pharmaceutical space. It's sort of opened me up to being able to interact with so many talented analysts, engineers, architects, software engineers, to create SaaS products, which is what we do. And I think it's ultimately, to the philosophical point of your question, it's opened up a place for me that I think it turned out to be much more natural and a much better fit for me, than being maybe at the bench, where I once was. If that answers the question, Shahir.
It sure does. Yeah, it sure does. So it's always a great experience talking to you, interacting with you guys at Larval, and yeah. So if we were to talk about Larval specifically as a company, how do you see it as a place that we are working right now? And would you like to shed some light on what exactly Larval does? Maybe a bit detail on the products as well.
Sure. And if we're going to go infomercial, that's a bit of a joke. Happy to do so. But to my prior point, working with Larval has exposed me to all different new fields and just new areas in the healthcare space, and how to support the pharmaceutical industry. Things that I probably wouldn't have pictured when I was a 25-year-old graduate student. I hadn't pictured, in my younger days, or even in my postdoc, to be
Mm.
perfectly honest, pictured how to leverage technology like we do, technology and curation like we do with our KOL identification and monitoring efforts with Omni. I didn't have visibility before in my career about the need for that, for the pharma industry, identifying those activities for medical science liaisons, people in the field, and how to interact with KOLs when you're doing a product launch. And so the tools that something like Omni provides, also something that I wasn't exposed to maybe as a younger graduate student, or even my postdoc again. The level of competitive intelligence needs, ranging from every publication to every conference to, even financial and related information, needing that to be pushed to my inbox, and having a feed, and having immediate accessibility to that type of competitive intelligence data, that we do in Pulse. Again, that was something that wasn't, I didn't necessarily have line of sight to. And it's also been a really great pleasure, especially over the past couple years, focusing on something I was more familiar with and had worked with in terms of knowledge bases. And it's been a real pleasure creating really unique knowledge bases in oncology, with our platforms, Clin, also our biomarker platform, which is called Very. It's been a real pleasure building really specific and unique and industry serving, knowledge bases and knowledge platforms like that. So I think I turned your question into I didn't know I would be doing this before I left academia. But I hope that also speaks to the spirit of the question.
Yeah, I mean, it always feels good to actually see a journey like yours, Mark. Actually, I mean, you've been a very thorough professional, and the way that you have been speaking about all the products, sounds like yeah, these are all very amazing products that are actually playing a big role in the healthcare industry in current times. So yeah, thank you so much for letting us know about that as well. Now I know that you sometimes, okay, it's not related to healthcare, but you do play guitar. And how does that like how have you been managing things at your like personal level? How's the work life balance for you at this point, working at a remote company? You know, when sometimes you feel that you're working every time, but then again you get the flexibility of choosing what time you actually need to complete a project or an assignment. How's life at Larval, if you'd like to answer that?
Sure. Well, I think I'm supposed to answer it because I think that's the premise of Larval and Friends here. And I thought you'd sneak in a guitar question there. I don't play as much as I used to. But yeah, the work life, people reference work life balance, and of course, it's probably better described as work life fit. And honestly, it's almost difficult for me to describe because working with Larval, and I've also worked with other organizations for the past 10 years or so, and I've been completely remote for that entire time. So it's almost such a just part of the normalcy of how I work and how the Larval group's been enabled me to work that way. It's almost even hard to comment anymore. It's been, I think it's been especially interesting, in the COVID situation, which hopefully we're working our way out from. It was obviously very interesting to, for a year or so, a year and a half maybe. It was very interesting to have my wife working from home when the schools were put on virtual. And it was really, that was the biggest adjustment over the past couple of years, is having two of us working from home. And I'm sure a lot of people experienced that in the pandemic, but it was interesting to get a different perspective because I just got so used to working virtually, working remotely, to see how someone else so close to me adjusts to that type of working environment. So we all have our everyone has to have a certain you have to have a certain discipline, you have to have a certain pattern, you have to figure out what's right for you, and you have to find a comfortable space in the house. I think that's my biggest recommendation. I could go on, but maybe I'll pause there. I don't know if that was what you're looking for, but it's been an interesting couple years. Uh, so
Yeah, it sure has been. It sure has been a very interesting, like, yeah, it was a very interesting timeline for almost every professional working who had to actually switch to remote working. Uh, it was a kind of a new experiment, but I think that we have, as a professional, we have been able to figure out how we can utilize our resources working remotely. A lot of people used to disagree with this concept, but now things are changing for good, actually. So yeah, it's a good thing. Uh, Mark, you've already told us about your experience at Larval. You've told us about your work-life fit. Now, why would you prefer Larval over any other competitors in the market at this point? I know you already told us about the products and a little bit, but as a matter of fact, I know that we are doing the product Omni is actually better than anyone in the market right now. Nobody can compete with us on that part. Why do you think people should actually choose Larval over their competitors?
sure. Well, when you first at first I thought you were asking me why I prefer working at Larval over working somewhere else, and I wonder who's if anyone from the company is listening, and I didn't feel comfortable with that. That's a joke. But to
A
the
lot of people have
to
been listening. A lot of people have been listening.
Okay, well, so I'll pass on that interpretation of the question, but why, choose Larval products over others? I mean, the shortest answer to the question is people. And I don't want to say that in a banal way. I want to say it in a very specific way, which is all of the products and services that we provide, of course, leverage text mining and natural language processing and AI and those technological elements that are very much part of this field of competitive intelligence, software as a service, etc. But I think the most unique element is people, in that we have the expert level curation, attention to detail, the quality control, and those elements that feed into every line of every piece of data that we push or that we have on our platforms. And we're responsive to specific needs because we are able to customize, we are able to curate, we are able to really create the data solutions that our customers need, and really be responsive and attentive to that because of people. You can have all the AI and all the text mining in the world, but we're dealing with healthcare data, we're dealing with scientific publication data, we're dealing with very complex information. And if you simply rely on technology, you're going to be at a deficit, and you're not going to really be providing the sophistication of information that the pharma industry needs, which is, where our products primarily are sent. So that's again, I don't know if I phrased that part of our infomercial here, portion of the podcast, but I hope that speaks. I think I've said it 3 times. I hope that speaks to the question, Shahir, that LARVOL really provides that people element of the data that we do.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. You've been giving us all the details from inside. So yeah, it's thank you very much for the answer. Actually, we still have a bit of time left, Mark, and
Mhm.
I think that we
You want
have.
me to play guitar or something?
Oh, for sure, I'd
No,
love that.
no, that's a joke. That's another joke. I'm just kidding. You're saying, Shahir?
I always like to see you play guitar, Mark. You know that, right?
Fair enough. Well, not this morning. I'm not quite prepped up for that. So,
No problem. No problem. Maybe another time. So, uh, as the title of the podcast says, finding your places in all the spaces in healthcare. Right. Where do you think you're going from here, Mark? Your current place, because you have had a very versatile timeline. If we have a look back at it, how do you think it's gonna go ahead, or is it just gonna be free flowing, like you have been doing it in the past as well?
well, let me respond to that backwards, if I can. Sort of where, yeah, we said places and spaces. I thought that was a fun rhyme when we talked about a title. But to answer that question sort of in reverse is, it's not necessarily where I think of myself personally as where things are going. I think what's been so interesting over the past 10 years is being responsive and learning. That there's so many pockets and places, if you will, um, within the healthcare space, within the pharma space, um, that there's just always, there's always so much to learn. So to me, it's just been a great journey, both with LARVOL and other groups I've worked with, to learn about the needs within uh, clinical trial startup activities, within data management within healthcare institutions, how they leverage their data, both productizing it and leveraging it for improved patient care and how to process and manage that data. Learning, I've worked in smaller consulting efforts and smaller consulting and medium-sized consulting firms about, the needs to integrate and manage the science with the data, with even regulatory requirements of executing even a post-marketing trial. It's about learning about, like I already said, those competitive intelligence needs within pharma companies, about learning about the new ways that diagnostic and biomarker data can not only be reported upon, but the needs of integrating that type of data, if we think about it holistically, into knowledge bases, into electronic health records, into diagnostic databases, and how that data is reported to patients. And it's all of these sort of successive points of light that I keep learning and trying to do my best to respond to, and working with a great team to see, how we can support so much diverse needs within the healthcare space, in the pharma space, even within the payer insurance space. I've also worked there, looking at benefits management and how there's also such a need to integrate data specialists with the scientific processes. And that sounded like a bit of a word salad and a lot there. But to me, it's about learning and being responsive and being open to, I'd say, just open to not just defining yourself by a skill set, because there's not a how do I say? I'll conclude with this. There's not a college class or a graduate school class that outlines everything you're going to need to know in this industry. To the best of my knowledge, there's not a class for every single thing that's going on in the industry. So it takes responsiveness and learning. So to me, where you go is dictated by your willingness to learn. And that takes you along one way or another.
I
So,
certainly agree with that. Yeah. So, Mark, as working from the metaverse was a bit of a new experience for a lot of people, and so was it with the team at Larval as well when we were adopting the technology, right? How was that experience for you? How accepting were you when you first heard about that concept and the idea of maybe talking to the avatars, right? When you're in a Zoom call, you're seeing a person, right? Although you're not, there are a lot of aspects that are actually not experienced in a Zoom call that you can usually do in the metaverse itself. How do you think that you accepted that angle while you were working here, and especially as a healthcare professional? The reason I mentioned is that healthcare professionals are probably considered more sophisticated, considering some of the other industries in the world. So yeah, how was that for you?
well, I don't know how sophisticated I should be considered, but it's actually sort of ebbed and flowed. Obviously, it's been a big part of the experiment and how we're doing things here, with virtual reality and using that as part of our day to day. Um, I think when I say ebb and flow, I think at first it was very exciting but disconcerting at the same time. So many softwares and so many new things to adapt to, um, that was a big uphill climb to get going with that. I think once we got going, um, I actually got really, really excited about it. I sort of found new hobbies. My main hobby became building offices in Spatial, which is one of the apps that we use, and we're using other apps like Workrooms now. So it became my hobby to start learning how to put together furniture and art and things like that, and really exciting there. Um, I think over time, now I'm really trying to, I think we all are trying to focus on moving beyond the, I won't say novelty, I'll say moving beyond the great thing about VR in its first is that presence. That's the great thing about it. And now we have to sort of push forward, which is that presence is great. But now, with the technology still being a bit clunky, how do we use it to be effective? And in the best case scenario, more effective in our virtual working environment. And so that's sort of where I am now, which is um, sort of modifying my techniques, or modifying my basic day to day of how I conduct myself at my desk so that VR is more effective and I can work more effectively. So it's not linear. It's not a yay or a nay. It has its ebbs and flows, but that's what I'll say to it.
Yeah, it has actually been a nice experience overall, when you talk about the metaverse, because it's something that has been associated with Laravel for a long time now, like more than a year. And we recently had we had a bit of a program that we did with Bruno, who was not the CEO of the company, Bruno Larval, who was not coming out of the metaverse for a whole year. So he actually spent a year in the metaverse. It has been a new experience considerably. I'm just adding a few things to your points, Mark. It has been a new experience, but trust me, once we figured it out, once we were able to get our hands onto the platforms and everything that we have been using day to day, it feels really nice. It feels like that we are learning something from the future. It's certainly going to be the future. There are more and more people agreeing to that point these days. So yeah, thank you so much for shedding light on that as well, Mark. As we are moving towards the end of the podcast, Mark, we would
Mm-hmm.
be we would be having a takeaway from your side for this podcast. So it could be a word, it could be a sentence, and something that you'd like people to remember from this podcast today. So maybe if you'd like to move towards that.
Sure. I thought I had a concluding statement a minute ago. I think it escaped me. But just summarizing what we've been chatting about a lot today. We've been chatting about VR. We've been chatting about pharma. We've been chatting about a lot of the different things our products do within the healthcare and pharma space, and talking about sort of career changes, progression, and interest. And if you just throw all that in a pot, I'd say the take home is just be responsive to learn, and don't ever be, I think I've said this before, maybe even on this podcast, don't be held up in where you want to go next. It's always good to plan and always good to think forward, but you might discover a lot of great things if you just focus on learning and focus on new things and focus on new experiences. Because if you take in that, you might find yourself in the future in a really good spot, even in one that maybe you never thought you would be in. So that was much more than a word, but maybe I'll make that my final thought for today, Shahir.
Thank you very much, Mark. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us for today's podcast. And you did justice. We actually did justice to the title, which was Finding Your Places in All the Spaces in Healthcare. All right. Thank you very much, everyone, for tuning in. Have a very nice day. See you all next week. Bye bye.
Thank you, Shahir. Thanks, everyone, for listening. Bye.